Is she faking it? Did she sign over her inheritance yet? I read those 16 words on my husband's phone screen while lying in a hospital bed with an IV needle in my arm, a financial power of attorney on the tray table, and a silver pen he had placed in my trembling fingers 30 seconds earlier. His hand was still warm on mine. His eyes were still red from the tears he had rehearsed on the drive over. And the woman who sent that text, his mistress, was waiting by her phone to find out if I had been desperate enough to sign away 20 years of my life's work while I was too weak to read the fine print. Let me go back to the moment I woke up, so you understand exactly what kind of man tries to rob his wife on her hospital bed. I collapsed after a 12-hour surgical shift at Huntington Hospital. I was 53 years old, and I had not slept more than 4 hours a night in longer than I could remember. My body had finally decided it had enough of my stubbornness. One second, I was stripping off my latex gloves outside operating room 4, and the next second, the linoleum was rushing up to meet my face. I woke up in a sterile recovery room that smelled like industrial disinfectant and stale recycled air, with a needle buried deep in the crook of my arm and the taste of copper on my tongue. A nurse named Deborah was standing at the foot of my bed, writing something on a clipboard with a look on her face that told me I had scared the living daylights out of everyone on the 3rd floor. Then Garrett came through the door. My husband burst into that room like a man who had just received the worst phone call of his life. His face was pale. His tie was loosened. He rushed to the side of my bed, grabbed my hand, my cold IV-punctured hand, and squeezed it so hard I thought he might crack the bones. He pushed the hair from my forehead with trembling fingers and whispered, "Oh my God, Eleanor, I thought I lost you." His voice cracked on the last word. His eyes were red around the edges. He looked, for all the world, like a husband who had just been reminded that his wife was mortal, and the thought of losing her had shattered something inside him. I almost cried. I almost believed him completely. He sat on the edge of the narrow hospital bed and kept stroking my hair. He said all the right things. He told me I worked too hard. He said it was his fault for not stepping up sooner. He said, "Listen to me, Eleanor. Just this once, let me carry the weight. You have been killing yourself for this family, and I have been blind to it. I am so sorry." Then he reached into his leather briefcase, and I remember thinking, "Why did you bring your briefcase to the hospital?" And pulled out a neat stack of legal papers. He set them on the rolling tray table next to my untouched cup of water and placed a silver pen on top. "It is a financial power of attorney," he said softly, as if it were a love letter. "I want to manage the accounts, the mortgage, the investments, everything, so you do not have to think about a single number while you recover. You just rest. Let me handle it. Please." His hand was warm on mine. His eyes were steady. And for one fragile, exhausted moment, I reached for that pen. My fingers actually touched the cool metal barrel of it. Because after 20 years of carrying this family on my back, the idea of someone, anyone, saying, "Let me take care of you," was the most beautiful sentence in the English language. That is when his phone lit up. It was lying face down on the tray table right next to the power of attorney papers. He had left the message preview turned on. The screen glowed bright white in that dim hospital room, and the name at the top said Sylvia. The message underneath it read, "Is she faking it? Did she sign over her inheritance yet? Now you know. Now you have heard those 16 words the same way I heard them, lying flat on my back, barely able to lift my head, with the pen still in my hand, and the man I had given my life to sitting 3 inches away from me. Time stopped. The fluorescent lights above me were buzzing like angry wasps, and in the silence between each buzz, I read those words 3 times. Garrick saw my eyes move. He lunged for the phone so fast he knocked the cup of water off the tray table. It hit the floor and cracked open, sending water creeping across the linoleum in a slow puddle that neither of us looked at. He shoved the phone into his pocket and started talking immediately, fast, loud, desperate. Something about a work colleague, a misunderstanding, a joke taken out of context. I did not hear a single word he said. I was staring at the power of attorney papers. The pen was still in my hand. And I understood, with a clarity so sharp it felt surgical, that the man sitting on my hospital bed, the man who had just stroked my hair and called me his world, had not driven here because he was terrified of losing his wife. He had driven here because he saw my collapse as a business opportunity. My weakness was his window. My IV drip was his closing argument. He had rehearsed those tears in the car on the way over, and the woman named Sylvia had been waiting by her phone to hear whether the deal had closed. I looked into his eyes. I smiled weakly. I told him my hand was too shaky to sign today. He squeezed my shoulder, kissed my forehead, and told me there was no rush. We would do it when I felt stronger. He had no idea that my weakness ended at that exact second. Before I tell you what I did next, if you believe a woman's hard work should never be stolen, please take a second to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting me know what city or state you are listening from. Your support keeps me strong. I lay in that hospital bed for the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling, and I did not sleep. Not because of the pain in my body, that was nothing new, but because my mind had turned into a projector, and every frame it showed me was a memory I had spent 20 years carefully preserving in gold, now revealed under this new, hideous light to be made of tin. I thought about the beginning. I thought about the tiny one-bedroom apartment we rented on Maple Avenue when we were 33 years old, the one with the drafty windows and the radiator that clanged like a jail door every winter night. Garrick was finishing his finance certification then, and I was already working the night shift at the hospital because it paid an extra $1.60 an hour. I used to come home at 3 in the morning, my hands raw and cracked from surgical scrub solution, and find him asleep on the couch with his textbooks open on his chest. I would cover him with a blanket, wash my hands one more time because the skin was so dry it bled, and sit at the kitchen table under a single lamp, cutting coupons from the Sunday paper. 50 cents off laundry detergent, $1 off ground beef. I kept those coupons in a shoebox organized by expiration date, and I was proud of that shoebox because every cent I saved was a cent closer to the life we had promised each other. He proposed to me in that apartment. He got down on one knee next to the clanging radiator and said, "I know this place is small and cold, but I swear to you, Eleanor, I will give you the world." I believed him with every cell in my body. I framed that promise in my heart the way some people frame diplomas, and I carried it with me through every freezing midnight drive to the hospital, every holiday shift I volunteered for so the younger nurses could be with their families, every brown bag lunch I packed for both of us, because eating out was a luxury we could not afford. When Garrick got his first real position at the investment firm downtown, he told me we were finally on our way. I remember the night he came home with his first tailored suit in a garment bag. He held it up against himself and grinned like a boy on Christmas morning. I smiled and told him he looked like $1 million. What I did not tell him was that I had just turned down my acceptance into the healthcare management degree program at the university. I had the letter in my purse. I had carried it around for a week, reading it in the hospital break room during my 15-minute lunches, imagining a different life, one where I was not just assisting surgeons, but leading departments, making decisions, building something with my name on it. But the tuition was steep, and Garrick was just starting out, and someone had to keep the lights on. He told me that himself, though he said it sweetly. "One of us needs to keep the lights on, babe, and you're so good at what you do." So I put the acceptance letter back in the envelope, slid it into the bottom drawer of my nightstand, and never mentioned it again. I remember one night, Hazel was about 5 years old. I came home from a double shift at 2 in the morning, and she was sitting at the top of the stairs in her little flannel pajamas, waiting for me. She rubbed her eyes and said, "Mommy, why do you always smell like the hospital?" I picked her up and held her against my chest, and I could feel her tiny heartbeat through her pajamas, and I whispered, "Because Mommy is building us a castle, baby, one brick at a time." She fell asleep on my shoulder before I reached her bedroom. I laid her down, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and stood there for a long time in the dark, telling myself that every missed bedtime, every holiday shift, every aching joint was worth it because I was building something permanent, something no one could take away. For 20 years, I saved. I scrimped. I negotiated every bill, refinanced when rates dropped, and put money into our joint savings account on the first of every month like clockwork. When my mother passed away and left me her life savings, $200,000, every penny earned from 40 years of teaching elementary school in Sacramento, I deposited it into our family trust and told Garrick it was sacred money, legacy money, and it was never to be touched except for Hazel's future. He nodded solemnly and said, "Of course." When our daughter Hazel was born, I opened a college fund in her name and started contributing to it before she could even hold her own bottle. I did all of this because I believed in the promise of this country. Work hard, sacrifice for your family, be honest, and the reward will come. That was the deal. That was the American dream, and I had signed my name on it in blood and sweat and cracked hands and missed birthdays. I kept saving every dime to build a legacy, entirely blind to the fact that while I was counting pennies, he was planning to steal the entire bank. Lying in that hospital bed, I started counting backward through the last 2 years, and every memory I touched turned rotten. It was like pulling up floorboards in a beautiful house and finding termites underneath every single one. The first thing I remembered was the passwords. About 18 months ago, Garrick changed every password on his laptop, his phone, even the family Amazon account. When I asked him about it, he waved his hand and said the firm required new security protocols. I accepted that without a second thought, because why would I question my husband? Then came the business trips. Weekend conferences in Miami, Phoenix, San Diego, always in cities with expensive hotels and warm weather. He never brought back a single conference brochure, never mentioned a colleague's name, never once FaceTimed me from a seminar room or a hotel lobby. I noticed, but I did not say anything, because Hazel had a piano recital coming up, and I was pulling double shifts, and I did not have the energy to start a fight over what I told myself was probably nothing. Then there was the dinner party. That memory burned the worst. It was at our neighbor Jim and Carolyn's house, a casual Saturday evening with 3 other couples from the block. Someone asked about saving tips. Carolyn had just discovered a new budgeting app, and Garrick leaned back in his chair with a glass of red wine and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "My wife still clips coupons like it is 1985. I keep telling her we are not in the Depression anymore." Everyone laughed. I laughed too, because what else could I do? But under the table, my hands were shaking, because that coupon shoebox on Maple Avenue was one of the proudest things I had ever done, and he had just made it into a punchline at a dinner party. Carolyn caught my eye from across the table and gave me a look, a quick, quiet look that only another woman would understand, that said, "I see what just happened, and I am sorry." I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at my face in the mirror for a long time. The woman looking back at me was exhausted, and something behind her eyes was starting to crack, but she was not ready to admit it yet. There was another moment I buried, one that should have set off every alarm in my body. I was folding laundry one evening and found a restaurant receipt in the pocket of Garrick's sport coat. Le Bernardin, 2 guests, $467. The date on the receipt was a Saturday, the same Saturday he had told me he was at a financial planning seminar in Newport Beach. I held that receipt for a long time, turning it over in my fingers. And then I put it back in his pocket. I told myself it was a client dinner. I told myself there was an explanation. I told myself that the alternative was too terrifying to face. Because facing it meant admitting that the life I had built my entire identity around was a lie. So I folded his sport coat neatly, placed it on the back of the chair, and went to bed. The most painful red flag was the smallest one. Hazel came to me on a Thursday evening, still in her school clothes, and asked, "Mom, can you tell Dad to come to my recital on Friday? He promised last month." I texted Garrick. He replied that he had an unavoidable client meeting in Scottsdale that weekend. I watched Hazel play her heart out on that stage, and I recorded every second on my phone so he could watch it later. He never watched it. He never even asked about it. Months later, I would learn he was not in Scottsdale at all. He was at a beachfront resort in La Jolla with a woman named Sylvia Sterling, spending money he had taken from our daughter's college fund to pay for the suite. We often ignore the smoke because we are terrified of the fire. But sitting in that hospital bed, I realized my entire house had already burned to the ground, and I had been walking through the ashes, pretending the walls were still standing. I discharged myself from the hospital the next morning without telling Garrick. I signed the paperwork, removed the IV from my arm, changed into the spare clothes Deborah had kindly left in a bag by my bed, and walked out through the side entrance into the gray California morning. I did not go home. I drove 17 miles across town to a quiet red brick office building on Fairview Boulevard, parked my car under an oak tree that must have been 100 years old, and walked through a glass door that had the words, "Vance and Associates, Family Law," etched into it in gold lettering. Madeline Vance was in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a low bun and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Her office smelled like old leather and strong coffee. She looked at the hospital wristband still on my arm, then looked at my face, and without a word, she closed her laptop and gave me her full attention. I told her everything. I told her about the collapse, the hospital bed, the power of attorney papers, and the text message from Sylvia. I told her about the coupons and the radiator and the acceptance letter I buried in my nightstand 20 years ago. I told her about my mother's inheritance and my daughter's college fund and the business trips to cities with warm weather and no conference brochures. When I finished, Madeline took off her reading glasses, set them on the desk, and said something I will never forget. She said, "Eleanor, a man who ambushes you for a signature while you are lying in a hospital bed does not want a divorce. He wants a liquidation. He is not your husband anymore. He is a hostile acquisition, and you and I are going to treat him exactly like one." She paused, then leaned forward and added, almost in a whisper, "I have seen this script before. 30 years ago, a man in a very expensive suit tried to do the same thing to me. He is now living in a studio apartment in Bakersfield, and I am sitting in this chair. So do not shed another tear, Eleanor. Let us go hunting." Something shifted inside me when she said that. It was not rage. It was not sadness. It was something colder and quieter, a precision I recognized from the operating room. When you are a surgical nurse and the patient is crashing, you do not panic. You do not cry. You read the monitors, you hand the surgeon the right instrument, and you move with absolute calm because one wrong second kills someone. That was the energy I brought to Madeline's desk. I was not a betrayed wife anymore. I was a surgeon, and my marriage was the patient on the table, and the diagnosis was terminal. And the only thing left to do was an autopsy. Madeline's forensic accountant began the audit within 48 hours, and what he found in the first week made Madeline call me into her office on a Saturday morning, with a look on her face that told me to sit down before she spoke. The paper trail started with my mother's money. The $200,000, Every cent my mother had saved from 4 decades of teaching first graders to read was gone. Not invested, not moved, not reallocated. Gone. Garrick had quietly funneled it, in small monthly transfers designed to stay beneath reporting thresholds, into a shell consulting company called Sterling Meridian Partners. The company had no employees, no office, no website. It was registered in the state of Nevada under one name, Sylvia Sterling. My dead mother's life savings had been laundered through a fake company and handed directly to my husband's mistress. He did not just steal money. He stole the final gift my mother left for me from her deathbed. The money she pressed into my hand and said, "This is for Hazel's future and yours, baby. Promise me you will protect it." I had promised, and he had stolen it while I was asleep. At that moment, any lingering mercy I had for Garrick died quietly on the floor of Madeline's office, and nothing in this world was going to bring it back. But Madeline was not finished. The audit cut deeper, and what it uncovered next was almost worse because it was so breathtakingly calculated. 2 years ago, Garrick had pressured me into refinancing our home. He told me it was a smart financial move. Interest rates were low, we could pull out equity and invest it. Standard practice, nothing to worry about. I trusted him because he worked in finance and I did not. I signed the papers at our kitchen table while Hazel did her homework in the next room. What the forensic audit revealed was that the refinancing money, $140,000 pulled from the home we had spent 15 years paying down, never went into any investment. It went directly into a down payment on a luxury condominium in downtown Los Angeles. A condominium where Sylvia Sterling currently lived. I sat in Madeline's chair and let that truth wash over me like ice water. For 2 years, I had been working double shifts, dragging myself through 16-hour days in the surgical unit, destroying my body and my sleep, to make the monthly mortgage payments on a house that my husband had secretly leveraged to buy his mistress a love nest. Every time I clocked in for a night shift, every time I felt my knees ache and my vision blur from exhaustion, I was paying for Sylvia Sterling's Italian marble countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The mortgage payment I was killing myself to make every month was not protecting my family. It was financing my replacement. And then came the worst discovery of all, the one that turned my cold precision into something far more dangerous: a mother's fury. Garrick had systematically drained $60,000 from Hazel's college fund. Our 14-year-old daughter's future, the account I had started contributing to before she could walk, had been hollowed out to pay for first-class flights to Paris, luxury hotel suites in Rome, and a 2-week Mediterranean cruise. All with Sylvia Sterling. He stole from his own child to pamper a woman who texted, "Is she faking it?" while his wife lay in a hospital bed. He stole from his own blood to buy luxury for a stranger. He thought he was a financial genius, but he had just signed his own emotional death warrant. I drove home that afternoon and did something that required more discipline than anything I had ever done in an operating room. I walked through my own front door, looked my husband in the eye, and smiled. I put on my old, worn nursing scrubs, the ones he once called unglamorous at that dinner party, and I let my shoulders sag. I kept my eyes cast downward. I moved slowly, like a woman who had been beaten down by life and did not have an ounce of fight left in her. I sighed at the kitchen counter and told him, in a voice barely above a whisper, that the legal papers he had given me at the hospital were confusing, but I would sign whatever he needed at the upcoming joint meeting with the lawyers. I told him I was just too tired to think about money anymore. I told him he was right. He should handle everything. The look on his face was something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It was not relief. It was triumph. It was the look of a man who had just closed the biggest deal of his career. He actually patted me on the shoulder, the way you would pat a dog that had finally learned to sit, and said, "That is the smartest decision you have made in years, Eleanor." Then he walked into the living room, pulled out his phone, and started texting. Right there, 10 feet away from me, not even bothering to hide it anymore. Because in his mind, I was already done. I was already erased. I was a signature on a dotted line, a formality between him and everything I had ever built. There was one night I almost lost everything. Garrett came home early from what he claimed was a client dinner, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with Madeline's latest forensic report spread out in front of me. Bank statements, transfer records, Sylvia's company registration. I heard his key in the front door, and my heart nearly stopped. I swept the papers into the grocery bag I kept under the table for exactly this scenario, shoved it into the pantry behind the cereal boxes, and was standing at the kitchen sink washing dishes by the time he walked in. He looked at me, looked at the table, and said, "Were you doing something?" I held up a wet plate and said, "Just cleaning up. Hazel spilled juice." He grunted, grabbed a beer from the refrigerator, and went upstairs. I stood at that sink for 10 full minutes, my hands trembling under the running water, waiting for my pulse to stop pounding in my ears. That was the closest I came to being caught, and it taught me something I already knew from 20 years in the operating room. Steady hands save lives, and shaking ones end them. What he did not know was that every night after he fell asleep, I was in the garage, sitting in my parked car with the dome light on, reviewing documents that Madeline's team had sent to my private email, an account he did not know existed. I photographed bank statements. I cross-referenced dates. I cataloged every lie he had told me in the last 2 years and matched it to a corresponding financial transaction. I was building a case so airtight that no judge in the state of California would need more than 15 minutes to see through him. I served him dinner every evening with a pleasant, tired expression on my face, and he ate it without a shred of suspicion. Because the one thing Garrick never respected about me was my intelligence. He saw the scrubs and the cracked hands and the coupon box and decided I was simple. That was his fatal mistake. He looked down at me as I served him dinner, smiling as if I were a ghost. He had no idea I was actually the executioner, sharpening the blade with a patience he could never comprehend. As a mother, discovering that the person you trusted stole your own child's future is a pain that changes you forever. If you were in my shoes, would you have confronted him right there? Or would you play the long game like I did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and type the word justice to show your support for Hazel and me. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late October, in a glass-walled conference room on the 12th floor of a building on Wilshire Boulevard. I arrived early with Madeline. We sat on our side of a long, polished mahogany table that reflected the Los Angeles skyline like a dark mirror. Madeline placed her leather briefcase on the table, a worn, brown briefcase that she told me had been with her through over 300 divorce cases, and she did not open it. She simply folded her hands on top of it and waited. Garrick arrived 11 minutes late, which Madeline told me was a deliberate power move. He walked through the door in a charcoal designer suit with a silk pocket square, his hair freshly cut, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He was wearing a gold watch I had never seen before. I would later learn he had bought it with money skimmed from our joint savings, and he adjusted it casually as he sat down across from me, the way a man adjusts his cufflinks before a board meeting. He did not look at me. He looked through me, the way you look through a window. His attorney, a sharp-faced man named Whitfield, sat beside him and slid a thick document across the table toward Madeline with the confidence of someone delivering a checkmate. It was their proposed settlement. I watched Madeline flip through it with a neutral expression. The terms were breathtaking in their cruelty. Garrick wanted the house. He wanted 70% of the liquid assets. He wanted me to vacate the family home within 30 days, on the grounds that, and I am quoting the document here, the respondent's nursing income is insufficient to independently maintain the property. In other words, the man who had been stealing from me for years was now arguing that I was too poor to keep the home I had paid for with my own blood. He wanted to take everything I had built, keep everything he had stolen, and leave me standing on the sidewalk with a suitcase. And the worst part? was the look on his face while Whitfield read the terms aloud. He leaned back in his chair, crossed one leg over the other, adjusted that gold watch again, and smirked. He actually smirked. Because in his mind, this was already over. I was the tired little nurse with the cracked hands and the coupon box, and he was the finance man in the charcoal suit. And there was no version of this story where someone like me outmaneuvered someone like him. My husband leaned back, adjusted his gold watch, and waited for me to cry. Instead, I looked at Madeline Vance, and she smiled back. Madeline did not raise her voice. She did not argue with Whitfield's settlement terms. She did not object or protest or make a dramatic speech. She simply unclasped her leather briefcase with 2 quiet clicks that sounded, in the silence of that conference room, like the cocking of a weapon. Then she placed 3 thick folders on the table. They were color-coded: red, blue, and green. She slid the red one across the mahogany toward Whitfield first. "This," Madeline said calmly, "is a complete forensic accounting of $200,000 in inheritance funds belonging to my client, left to her by her deceased mother, which were transferred in structured amounts below reporting thresholds into a shell consulting company called Sterling Meridian Partners, registered in Nevada under the name Sylvia Sterling. I have included the bank routing numbers, the transfer dates, and the incorporation documents." Whitfield opened the folder. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might need medical attention, and for one absurd second, the surgical nurse in me almost offered to help. Madeline slid the blue folder across next. "This is the forensic trail for the home refinancing my client was coerced into signing 2 years ago. The equity withdrawal of $140,000 was not invested as represented. It was used as a down payment on a luxury condominium in downtown Los Angeles, currently occupied by Sylvia Sterling. My client has been making the increased mortgage payments from her nursing salary for 2 years, effectively subsidizing her husband's extramarital living arrangement." Garrick uncrossed his legs. His smirk was gone. His jaw was working, but no sound was coming out, like a man trying to scream in a nightmare. Madeline slid the green folder last. She placed it down gently, almost tenderly, the way you lay flowers on a grave. "And this," she said, "is the documentation of $60,000 systematically withdrawn from the college savings account of Hazel Sinclair, age 14, my client's daughter. The funds were used for international travel, luxury accommodations, and personal entertainment, none of which involved the child. I have credit card statements, hotel receipts, and airline booking confirmations with 2 passenger names, Garrick Sinclair and Sylvia Sterling." The silence in that room was so thick I could hear Garrick's attorney breathing. Whitfield closed the green folder, placed both of his palms flat on the table, and turned to look at his own client with an expression I can only describe as professional horror. It was the look of a lawyer realizing that his client had not just lied to his wife, he had lied to his own attorney. Whitfield leaned over and whispered something in Garrick's ear, and even from across the table, I could read his lips. "You told me the accounts were clean." The smug smile evaporated from my husband's face like mist in sunlight. For the first time in 20 years, I watched his hands shake uncontrollably. The gold watch rattled softly against the mahogany table, and in that tiny, metallic sound, I heard the collapse of every lie he had ever told. The mediation dissolved in under 4 minutes. Whitfield stood up, collected his papers with the stiff efficiency of a man trying to distance himself from a sinking ship, and asked for a private sidebar. Madeline denied it. "Everything from this point forward goes through formal channels," she said, and Whitfield did not argue. He practically dragged Garrick out of the conference room by the elbow. I found Garrick in the hallway outside the elevators. Or rather, he found me. He was leaning against the wall, his charcoal suit jacket unbuttoned, his pocket square crooked, his face the color of old paper. The gold watch hung loose on his wrist because his hand had lost so much tension it seemed to have shrunk. When he saw me, he pushed off the wall and came toward me with his palms up, like a man surrendering. His eyes were wet and his voice was a wreck. He said, "Eleanor, please, please, you have to listen to me. I made mistakes, I know that, but you have to understand. Sylvia, she made me feel important. She made me feel like I mattered." I stood perfectly still. I let him finish. I let every pathetic word hang in the air between us like smoke. And then I looked at him. Not with anger, not with hatred, not even with contempt. I looked at him with something far worse: clarity. I saw him for exactly what he was. Not a villain, not a mastermind. Just a small, hollow, terrified man who had thrown away a family and a fortune and a woman who would have walked through fire for him. All because a younger woman with a fake consulting company had told him he was special. I looked down at his trembling frame and said, "You did not need to feel important, Garrick. You needed to be a man. And today, you are neither." Then I turned and walked to the elevator. I pressed the down button. The doors opened. I stepped inside, and as they closed between us, I saw him slide down the wall until he was sitting on the hallway floor with his head in his hands. I did not feel satisfaction. I did not feel victory. I felt the clean, sharp, surgical relief of a tumor being removed, and I knew, with absolute, unshakable certainty, that I would never spend another second of my life in pain because of him. The aftermath came swiftly, and it came completely. The forensic documentation that Madeline had assembled for the divorce mediation was so thorough that it triggered a second investigation. When the details of Garrick's structured financial transfers reached the compliance department at his firm through legal discovery channels, they launched an internal audit within 72 hours. He was terminated for financial misconduct before the month was out. Not quietly, not with a golden parachute, not with a polite resignation letter. He was escorted from the building by security on a Wednesday afternoon while his colleagues watched from their glass offices, and his name was scrubbed from the company directory before he reached the parking garage. Sylvia Sterling, for her part, demonstrated the loyalty that money-driven love always demonstrates when the money disappears. The moment she learned that Garrick was unemployed, under legal investigation, and facing potential criminal referral for structured financial fraud, she executed a move of such poetic ruthlessness that even Madeline raised an eyebrow when she heard about it. Sylvia emptied every personal account Garrick had left, checking, savings, even the small emergency fund he kept at a separate bank, transferred the contents to an account only she controlled, and vanished. She disconnected her phone number, vacated the luxury condo, and left behind nothing but an empty closet and an unpaid utility bill. Garrick, the man who had stolen from his own wife and daughter to build a life with this woman, was repaid in the exact currency he had taught her to value: betrayal. He ended up in a tiny rented studio apartment in Pomona, alone, with no job, no savings, no family, and a legal file that would follow him for the rest of his professional life. The symmetry was not lost on me. I sold the house. I did not hesitate, and I did not look back. That house on Birchwood Lane was not a home anymore. It was a crime scene. Every room held a lie, and I was done living inside other people's deceptions. Madeline's team handled the sale, and the proceeds, combined with the full restitution the court ordered Garrick to pay, allowed me to do 3 things that I had been waiting half a lifetime to do. First, I restored Hazel's college fund. Every single dollar, back where it belonged, untouchable in a new account with only my name and hers on it. When I told Hazel what her father had done, carefully, gently, sitting beside her on her bed with my arm around her shoulders, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I know you will always protect me, Mom." I held her so tight I thought my heart would crack open. And I promised her, out loud and in front of God and the California sunset pouring through her window, that no one would ever touch her future again. Second, I bought a townhouse. It was small and clean and flooded with morning light, tucked into a quiet street lined with jacaranda trees that turned purple every spring. It had a reading nook by the kitchen window and a backyard just big enough for 2 chairs and a lemon tree. It was mine. My name on the deed. My key in the lock. my lemon tree. Third, and this was the one that made me cry, the only time I cried through this entire ordeal, I enrolled back in school. I applied to the healthcare management program, the same one I had been accepted into 20 years ago, the same one I had given up because someone told me he needed me to keep the lights on. The acceptance letter arrived on a Saturday morning, and I stood in my new kitchen holding it with both hands, reading it over and over while the coffee got cold. And I let the tears come, because these were not tears of grief. They were 20 years of a deferred dream, finally being allowed to breathe. One morning, not long after, I was sitting on the front porch of the townhouse with Hazel. She was 16 by then, taller, sharper, funnier, more herself every day. We had our coffee mugs. Hers was mostly milk. She was still getting used to the taste. And the acceptance letter was pinned to the corkboard just inside the front door, next to a photo of my mother and a drawing Hazel had made in kindergarten of the two of us holding hands under a yellow sun. Hazel looked at me sideways and said, "Mom, you look lighter. Like, actually lighter. Like someone took a backpack off you that you have been wearing for 100 years." I laughed. I sipped my coffee. I watched the morning sun hit the jacaranda blossoms and turn them into something that looked like purple fire. And I thought about that word, lighter, and I knew exactly what she meant. Because for 20 years I had carried the weight of a man who told me he would give me the world and then tried to steal mine. I had carried his ambition, his ego, his lies, and his cruelty on my back alongside my own dreams, my daughter's future, and my mother's legacy. And I had carried it all without complaint, because I believed that was what good women did. And now, sitting on this porch with the daughter I had protected, and the acceptance letter I had earned, and the lemon tree I had planted with my own two cracked, healed, beautiful hands, I finally understood something that took me half a century to learn. The best revenge was not watching him fall. It was watching myself rise. I thought about what Garrick had said to me 20 years ago in that cramped apartment, the night I gave up my acceptance letter. "One of us needs to keep the lights on, babe." He was right about one thing. Someone did need to keep the lights on. But he never understood that I was not just keeping the lights on for him. I was the entire power grid. And now, on my own porch, in my own home, with my own name on the deed and my own future on the corkboard, I was keeping the lights on for myself and my daughter. And they had never burned brighter. I looked at my phone one last time before setting it down on the porch railing. There was a message from Garrick. I did not know how he got my new number, and I did not care. I read the first 3 words. "Eleanor, please, I..." And then I smiled, deleted it, and put the phone face down on the railing. I picked up my coffee. I looked at my daughter, and I did not think about him again. Thank you so much for standing by my side through this long journey. If my story proved to you that honesty, hard work, and a mother's love will always triumph over betrayal, please give this video a big like, subscribe for more healing stories, and leave a comment below sharing your own wisdom or thoughts on how I handled the truth. Stay strong, and bless you all.